I recognize a substantial share of you, actually, quite a few of you are my relatives. But for those of you I haven't had the privilege of meeting, I'm Larry Ismert. I've lived my younger years, my entire life in Pistol River, and then spent about 30 years in the Eugene area before we moved back to family property here at Pistol River. I was born in 1939, late in 1939. Right between two major events that shaped not only Curry County, but the state of Oregon, United States of America, and the world in general. First of those being the Great Depression, which most historians will tell you began in about 1929 and lasted until 1933. Actually, the effects of that depression lingered far beyond 1933. The second of those events was World War II, which again, changed the way we did business. My glasses on so I can read my notes here. Much better. During the Depression, President Roosevelt in about 1933 saw the need. Most Americans were struggling. They were without jobs, they were without money. And he formed the Civilian Conservation Corps, which became quickly abbreviated to the 3 Cs. Camp number 1746 was located approximately where my house sits at the South Bank District today. About 100 men in that camp. It was estimated that there were, in the entire program, approximately 3 million young men of military age who went through that 3C program. They busied themselves planting trees. They erected a lot of the Forest Service lookout towers that were scattered around Curry County. They built roads. If those of you who have been around and driven up the north bank of Pistol River, about a mile and a half up the river, you'll come to a steep area with a rock wall on one side. 3Cs built that. That was one of their projects. So it was a much needed program. The men got paid about $30 a month. There was a catch, however. They were obligated to send $22 to $25 of that back to their dependents. So they were working for about $5 a month. But they were working. So the program served its purpose and helped a lot of young people maintain an eye on the future and get established to the point where they did, when the economy did recover, they became productive citizens of this country. There were a lot of camps in Oregon. I don't know how many, but there were a lot. Part of my father leased that site to the government. And this was, as I said, was in around 1933 or 34. The Depression had already taken a serious toll on my family at that point. But people got through it. Through things such as this, the lease of that site helped tremendously. And neighbors helped neighbors. I still recall the sound of the Gardner family's old Jeep coming down the North Bank Road when I was a little kid. And, 8 years, 6, 8 years old, somewhere there. And the Gardner family raised hogs out in the hills. And that Jeep would come down and back up to our pig pen. And they'd dump 2 or 3 gunny sacks out in the pig pen. They had about 3 little piglets that ended up down there. And when the Jeep went back up the hill, it was loaded with cottage cheese and butter and milk and eggs. And my mother baked about twice a week. And it's kind of like a trip to Fred Meyer's, except we had pigs out of it. So then we had bacon and ham then all winter. We didn't have refrigeration, but my mother cured the bacon and ham, and it lasted just fine. There was an additional degree, of course, of difficulty in recovering from the Depression with the advent of the war, because most of the able-bodied young people were in the service, and they weren't able to help bail out the families that had struggled through the Depression. So that group of people, when they returned to civilian life, there were a lot of needs that all of a sudden showed up that they hadn't had before. They were looking for housing. There was none to be had, very little. And we back up just a little bit here. World War II, declaration of war was Pearl Harbor happened December 7th, 1941. The declaration of war came the next day, on December the 8th. It's interesting that the declaration of war on Germany occurred 3 days after that. I remember as a child, hearing the mortar rounds. The Coast Guard had emplacements along the Oregon coast, probably along the whole Pacific West Coast. One that you probably have seen, some of you at least, is up at just north of Wedderburn, on the hill overlooking the Agate Beach area. I don't really know where the one was down here, but I certainly remember hearing the guns, and they're pretty loud. And I also recall my mother every evening hanging up heavy wool blankets in all the west-facing windows to cut down any light emission out toward the ocean. Might sound a little hokey right now, but there were good reasons for it. Probably some of you, or maybe most of you, recall an event that happened in 1962 when a man named Nobuo Fujita presented the city of Brookings with his family's samurai sword as a gesture of international peace and goodwill. He was the pilot who flew the small plane that was delivered via submarine to a location near Port Orford that flew over Mount Emily and dropped incendiaries in the hope of starting a forest fire that would rob the United States of some of their ability to respond to Japan. It had rained not too much long before that, apparently, and that one didn't work. One thing, and I researched this a little bit because I was interested in it, and decided I wanted to talk to you about it. That was one of two attempts at that airplane made on that trip to the west coast of Oregon. It was September 9th of 1942. 20 days later, they tried it again, east of Port Orford. That one did start a small fire or two, but it was pretty quickly extinguished. I guess I really wasn't aware of that until I started reading a little bit about it. The submarine that delivered that aircraft, the aircraft was a collapsible amphibious plane stored in the hull of the submarine. They apparently surfaced, rolled the thing out, put it together, and this guy got in and flew it. First of all, he had to be crazy. But he did that. He did his job, and then later came back and apologized essentially for it. That submarine was named the I-25, and he made numerous trips around the West Coast. I believe on this trip, it actually it had torpedoed two oil tankers, one called the Camden out of Coos Bay. It didn't sink it, but it seriously damaged it. It was grounded. The other one was just off Cape Sebastian. That was the Larry Doheny, and it sank that, and I think the report that I read said 6 of the crew died in that torpedo attack on that tanker by the same submarine that delivered the airplane that delivered the firebombs to Mount Emily. The Second World War was tragic, but there were a few silver linings to that cloud following the war. During this particular period, the U.S. military franchise needed wool. They made uniforms, they made wool blankets. Wool was in high demand, and the United States needed it. And the government came up with a subsidy for wool that actually provided incomes for a lot of Curry County citizens who you didn't need to have a big ranch, although the Crook family, I believe, had about 900 head of ewes that they sure sent wool out of. But even small ownerships could arrange to get 30, 40 head of sheep, and with the subsidy that was on the wool, gave them a little additional source of income at a time when people around here really needed it. The second bit of good news was that as these soldiers and Marines and sailors re-entered civilian life looking for housing, the housing market responded to that, and the demand for lumber and plywood, timber products, all of a sudden showed up in spades. And until that time, till the 1940s, although there were some mills around, they were small mills, basically servicing the people here. That changed things. The mills then became available to provide these kind of products nationwide. And when I was young, there were probably from Carterville to, say, Hunter's Creek, there were probably half a dozen mills or more. Bob Swan had a mill just on the other side of Carterville, near the old Cold Grove Ranch, not far from it, between Stanley's and the mill and the old Mountain House. A man named Bodenheimer had one this side of Carterville near the Skyline Lodge. You'd never see it if you went by because it was down underneath the road. Freeman Gatchett had a mill here at Pistol River. Paul Ackerman has a mill up Pistol River. And a little bit after this period, the Zubers, in conjunction with, there are about 3 people involved in the mill, that the old burner sits just up the north bank of Pistol River Road, 1.5 miles, 2 miles, which is still there. And probably a lot of people have noted some have photographed it still hanging in the brush there. So the wood products industry then boomed. Until that point, however, it wasn't a major economic factor. But as these mills began to generate, bigger mills came in, and young people had an opportunity for family wage income, and they were able to support their families, contribute to the local population. It was an advantage all the way around because schools had a few more dollars to teach students. People could put food on the table without having to rob Peter to pay Paul, and it was a welcome sight to people that had come through the Depression not that far before. I want to tell you a couple other stories that are really outside this period of the Second World War Depression area. And one is the Ruby Van Dievener story. You guys know the Van Dievener story? Well, Ruby Van Dievener was married to a man named, I believe it's Arthur Van Dievener. I don't know if I wrote that here. He worked in the Siskiyou National Forest had been formed in about 1902 or somewhere there. Lookouts were scattered around through the forest. They were essentially caretakers of the forest at that point. And Van Dievener, who everybody called Van, but I think his first name was Arthur, was an assistant or associate district ranger at maybe Powers or Agnes somewhere. So he worked in the Forest Service during this period. In about 1917 or 1918, he was serving as a lookout on Snow Camp Lookout at the headwaters of Pistol River. His wife, Ruby, was a well-educated woman. She spoke a number of languages, and she happened to have an interest in botany. So she was forever botanizing wherever they were stationed. They were at Snow Camp, and she was down, as I understand it, somewhere around Fairview Meadows, just a little west of Snow Camp. And she heard people talking. Now, the lookouts all had telephone service, even at that time. They'd string their wires out through the woods on little insulators on the trees, and so they had a way to call in. If they spotted a fire, they could announce it very quickly. Anyway, she heard people talking, and she listened, and fortunately, she happened to be fluent in German, and understood the language well, and she understood what they were saying. And she gathered from listening to them that they were trying to set up a radio, possibly to try to contact a submarine or something of that nature. So she quietly went back up and looked out and told Van, and he called it in. And he sent it. Eventually, then a group of men went up, arrested these people, and brought them in. The first time I heard that story, I thought, yeah, really. But it was later determined that was true. In fact, Maureen, one of your ancestors, Ruby, told my mother that or Viva, I guess, my sister, had asked her about it. And she said, oh, she said that did happen to us. As a matter of fact, her father was one of the men who went back up to arrest him. And my father never spoke of it. I never remember hearing him speak of that at all. But it was an event that happened, and it was later proved, because she was awarded a medal by the government for her service in thwarting this attempt in the First World War. I'm sorry? Yeah, I'm not sure she was. She was just a well-educated person. I thought she'd gone to the University of California, but I'm not sure. But she was a very avid botanist, as was my sister, and they talked frequently, and Ruby confirmed with Viva that that's what happened. And the other interesting thing, and this is a writing that my sister had put together, and it goes as this. Central Curry County in the 1930s and 1940s was home to a number of men who seemed to have no connection to families here or to each other. Other local farmers and ranchers were mostly descendants of early settlers whose families came sometime between the 1860s and 1920s. What brought these old men to Curry County? At the time I knew them or knew of them, they were probably aged 40 to 60. Some I remember from my childhood, but most around in the 1940s when I was in high school. This is my sister talking. She was 10 years older than I. Some were casual acquaintances whom I knew only by hearsay. They're associated in my mind only because they lived alone and seemed to have no family, at least not here in Curry County. I'm sure now that my impressions of them were not the full picture. These days we might call them eccentric, but their eccentricity may have been necessary for their survival in those hard times. None were wealthy. They made do as most rural folk did in the years after the Depression. There were speculations and rumors and myths and legends about them. Did they come here trying to outrun the law? Curry County was the end of the world. Good place to hide out. Was it some misdeed in their past, or a lost love, or unwanted family ties or responsibility? Maybe they just preferred as far as population and wilderness. That's what looks to us. I doubt if they were remittance men. Does that term remind you of something that you might have read in a Zane Grey novel? He mentioned it. The remittance men, as it was explained to me and as to Viva, referred to a person whose family sent him money in hopes he would not return home. In any event, one of our neighbors was one of these soul type people that showed up in the county. His name was Edgar Bravestone. He's one of the residents of our cemetery now, just wherever he lived the rest of his life. Another one was a man named Barnett, whose name is Chester Barnett. Yes, who lived up near Sundown. I don't know that there's any trace left of the cabin that he had up there, but it's on the west side of Sundown up here at the top. People who've spoken here earlier made a number of references to the Kettlesington village on Coast Ron Cliff. And my mother, Elma, was one of the people who joined with Ron and others to sift through those sands there to try to capture as much of the artifacts an archaeological value as they could. Some of the things, and I believe that the bones were mentioned, the University of Oregon eventually ended up with those bones to study them. They finished their studying eventually and then returned the bones to the Coquel tribe. Although there was some possibly difference of opinion with the Confederated tribes of Siletz and the Slows, I'm not sure about who actually owned them. They were ancestral bones, and they're recovered not only from that site, but from other sites. And one of the members of the Toloa Tribal Council is a Pist River person, and she probably was involved in this. At one time, the board of directors for the Pist River Cemetery and Maintenance District met to discuss this, and working with the Coquels, we determined that, we felt that it was appropriate to put a place in our cemetery for this collection of ancestral bones. And we passed a measure to do exactly that. It has not been done, and it will be done at their pleasure and in the way they prefer to see it done when it is done. But the cemetery lies only about a quarter of a mile from the site where these folks lived and died. And I think it's appropriate. I thought so then, and I still do. My mother was active in these kind of things, and she also thought she was somewhat of a poet. And she wasn't bad. And her participation in the removal of the artifacts from this site prompted her to write this poem. I'm going to read it to you. This is Findings at Chilesington Village. All along old Curry's shores and the sand dunes on the moors, there we found reminders of the days long ago. In old shell mounds, deep and wide, by the seething ocean's side, we went digging for the artifacts we knew we'd find below. As we dug and searched the sand near the ocean's glistening strand, we found ornaments and arrow points and implements of bone. Arrow points so finely notched, they discarded those they botched. Charms and needles, pins and rings, and tools made of stone. Ancient ivory, carved so fine, beauty in its every line. He who did this knew the joy of skillful work well done. We who find these things admire him. We sat beside his fire, chipping points and carving ivory beneath the western sun. Thus we dug right carefully, bit by bit, so patiently, so we not disturb the occupants if sepulchres were found. Oh, we found them very soon at these diggings in the dune, where they were placed so surely in their happy hunting ground. Yes, we buried them carefully, moved them all so tenderly, for the occupants of these rude graves were humans, just as we. They had followed tribal rule taught to them in nature's school, made obeisance to the Father, lived the good life, proud and free. These bones once moved smoothly in long, strong muscles, glowing skin, which had felt the burning sand, the wind, the splash of ocean foam. Yes, those bones were people then. Women, children, brave, strong men, and they went about food gathering and building of a home. Chilesington is no more, blackened, buried, every door. There's nothing now but these remains to tell a tale. But the arrow points for war and the ornaments for more tell of real people who have passed beyond the veil. I discovered that in some of my mother's collection of poetry. I can look as a copy of it, and there were quite a few others. I thought it was well written in terms of expressing that these were people. They appear every right to do so, and The respect for them is required. Well, I'll be available if you have questions. Um, and if you think I can answer them, take a shot at it. However, that's all I have prepared to say now.